Good morning, one and all. We are continuing this Bibliotopia devoted to revolution with revolutionary women. Revolutionary women that our two authors will help you discover. They each wrote books about unsung heroines, women who were revolutionaries, anarchists, militants, activists, women who at one point or another in their lives decided to become politically active and defend women's rights, or more generally speaking. And it is about these women that we will be talking. We will talk about activism. How can activism be sustained over the course of one's life? And how are these women remembered since they fought for rights that we now enjoy? Danielle Roulet, you're a Swiss author. You are known here and abroad. You wrote more than 20 books, novels, and narratives. You also received a certain number of prizes and awards. I can maybe mention your series of novels called La Simulation Humaine, The Human Simulation. You've also just released a new book on lakes. It's called Frontières liquides, Journal des lacs, Liquid Borders, entirely of lakes, published by Phébus. But today we are going to talk about a novel that you've published with Buchet-Chastel in 2018, which is called 10 Petits Anarchistes, 10 Little Anarchists. It's a novel that is told by we, which is important because the narrator is a single woman, Valentine, but the main character of the novel is this we. 10 women who left their village in the Jura mountains, Saint-Imier. They were blue-collar workers in this watchmaking village and decided to leave it to go on an anarchist adventure. Their names, Mathilde, Jeanne, Émile, Adèle, Germaine. And they will embark on an odyssey that will take them from Switzerland to Argentina, which is quite an adventure at the time. Saint-Imier, and that's what you say at the beginning of the novel, is home to a scandal because Dr. Basowitz, who was a Jew, because he'd said too many positive things about Jean-Jacques Rousseau, will be driven away from the village by its government, by its council, while the villagers defend him. You say the story at the time Valentine Grimm, our narrator, is 6, and you tell this story to show how anarchism and politics will be integrated in the village. Saint-Imier is also where the International Anarchist Conference of September 1872 takes place, that will attract major anarchist figures such as Bakounine. Constance Bantman, you've published Femmes de Révolution, Women of the Revolution, Portraits of Activists Who Have Changed the World. It was published by Éditions du Seuil in 2025. It's an essay, a series of portraits. You are a graduate of the École Normale Supérieure in Lyon. You studied English. You're a lecturer and researcher at the University of Surrey in Great Britain. And your research has focused on Louise Michel, one of the great feminist figures of the Paris Commune. Through this book, you help us discover these women who fought for the rights of people, of women, Théroigne de Méricourt, Harriet Tubman, Claudette Colvin, Rosa Parks, Stormé de Larverie, Jeanne Derouin, Angela Davis, Emma Goldman, Jamila Bouhirad, amongst many others. Many women who fought for voting rights, for contraception, abortion, and refusal to wear the Islamic headscarf. And we are going to read the story of one of these women, Pia Klemp. You are going to tell us why you chose her. Good morning, Oriane. I'm going to read an excerpt of the chapter on Pia Klemp. We will let you discover this in French since the book has not been translated.
Ce n'est ni un secret, ni une surprise. C'est délibéré, explique la capitaine de navire allemande Pia Klemp. Voilà plusieurs années qu'elle porte secours à des personnes qui risquent leur vie en tentant de traverser les eaux méditerranéennes dans des embarcations de fortune, souvent après des mois ou des années d'errance et de torture pour arriver là. Même si les dangers encourus par Pia Klemp sont sans commune mesure avec ceux qui menacent les personnes qui entreprennent cette traversée souvent mortelle, elle aussi prend des risques importants. En effet, aux yeux de la loi, elle se rend ainsi coupable d'aider l'immigration clandestine. Mais aux yeux de nombreux citoyens, c'est une activiste féministe, antifasciste et antiraciste qui fait acte de courage et de solidarité au cœur du drame qui se joue aux portes de l'Europe. Des dizaines de milliers de personnes. Tel est le nombre approximatif de personnes qui, chaque année, essayent de traverser la Méditerranée dans des bateaux rudimentaires et surchargés, en espérant gagner l'Europe, au péril de leur vie. Ce sont les protagonistes de cette histoire, et les plus difficiles à entendre, car ils et elles sont contraints à la clandestinité et maintenus dans l'anonymat à chaque étape de leur parcours. Comme l'explique Pia Klemp, il ne faut surtout pas tomber dans le complexe du sauveur blanc, en mettant au centre de prétendus héros occidentaux secourant des personnes défavorisées. Sa conception de son travail est radicalement opposée à de tels discours. Je ne suis pas une humanitaire, je ne suis pas là pour aider, je suis solidaire à tes côtés. Nous n'avons pas besoin de médailles. Nous n'avons pas besoin de pouvoir décidant qui est un héros et qui est illégal. En fait, il n'y a pas lieu de faire cela, car nous sommes tous égaux.
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire pourquoi?
Can you tell us why you chose Pia Klemp for this inaugural reading? Well, first of all, because of the cause she defends, because of her courage. It's an issue that's very close to my heart, the issue of climate refugees, refugees more generally speaking. We spoke about that yesterday. She's very brave, and I'm very struck by this. So we've all seen footage of boats sailing the Mediterranean, and what she says about refusing a revolutionary egotism, highlighting we instead of I, and her social consciousness. This is the reason why I chose Pia Klemp. Daniel, you are going to read the first chapter of the 10 Little Anarchists. We're all ears. We were awakened early by the sound of shovels clearing the snow from the doorways and opening paths to the road where the triangle would pass. All night it had snowed throughout the Vallon and the surrounding villages. Every father and brother worked hard. Their breath was visible in the frigid air as we young daughters watched out the window from inside the house. The whole countryside was covered by a thick layer of snow, including the box hedges that bordered the vegetable garden, the stone walls, and fir trees whose branches bowed prettily beneath the weight of it. Soon we were putting on our Sunday best to go once the street was shoveled with our parents to church. Our father, old Grimm, went out on foot with his two daughters. That's to say, my sister Blondine, then 8 years old, and me, Valentine, 2 years younger. Two horses pulled a triangle made from two planks that formed a V, weighted with cinder blocks. The animals struggled when the road sloped up, and their thick breath seemed to express total exhaustion. They first went down the main street and then mounted step by step, clearing the snow from the mountain pass that bordered Montagne du Droit. Then they passed still higher around the farms that belonged to the parents of Colette and Juliette. It was 8 o'clock before the road crossing the Suze River and passing in front of the Grimm's house was cleared.
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire?
Can you tell us what the relationship is between you and the story you tell in 10 Little Anarchists? Well, this excerpt is something that I experienced myself. I lived in Saint-Imier from my birth until I was 15. Saint-Imier and the Vallon covered in snow during long winters is foundational. It's the base of what I want to write. I also think that Saint-Imier has an anarchist tradition. It's a legacy. If you go to the train station in Saint-Imier, you'll see that there's advertisement for big watchmaking brands at Tag Heuer and Longines. These are manufacturers that were born in Saint-Imier, and part of their manufacturers are still located there. But at the same time, you can go through the history of anarchism in Saint-Imier. It's been organized by the municipal council. There's Bakounine Street in Saint-Imier. I don't think that there's one such street in Paris. There's also 10 Little Anarchists Street, which has been newly named that way following my novel. Anarchy is not seen as something bad, something violent. It's seen as something nice. It's a way of behaving differently in a society where life was far from being easy and still isn't easy. Something that's very strong in your novel, you tell us the story of these women. They bear ideals, utopia, which is nice, soft, it's never violent. Well, I might have to explain. You told about this Jewish doctor who'd settled in the village. There was a tradition of rebellion, which was maintained over centuries. It also comes from the production means at the time. Watchmaking was done over the winter months. Parts were distributed in the farms during the winter months, and then they were put together in the summer. When the Industrial Revolution started, it was a shock. Instead of working at home in one's farm, you were working on a chain, which led to these women leaving Saint-Imier. I found quite a few documents saying why people had to emigrate. Switzerland was not the rich country that you can imagine at this stage. It's a country that was poor and sent 2 million mercenaries across the seas. And around the 1830, people had to emigrate. Their whole villages in Switzerland, in Ticino, in the Valais canton, and in the Jura, where whole groups of populations emigrated to Australia or Canada. Constance, why do the women in your book become politically active? Well, I say there's the revolutionary flame or spark. Théroigne de Méricourt, who opens the novel, is a tragic heroine of the French Revolution. Her life is very interesting. She was born in a very modest family, contrary to what her name may suggest, and her name was changed later on in her life. Her life was far from being easy. I don't think it's ever been documented before, but this is something that we find in other portraits. There's through experience of oppression. It's very clear with Afro-American women, be it Harriet Tubman, Claudette Colvin, Angela Davis, women who experienced gender violence in the last chapters of the book, Ni Una Menace, amongst others. So there's this very tangible experience, but there's also this magical spark, this flame. I don't want to be mystical, but there's Emma Goldman and all these other women whom I mentioned, and it's somehow disconnected from their socio-economic background. There are women who were activists. It's the case of Qiu Jin, who's an activist from the beginning of the century. She leaves her entire family behind and will die in an uprising. So their experiences, their lives are very different. Daniel de Roulet, at one point your narrator says we wanted a beautiful and dignified life. Is that the reason why they leave? Well, what I have to say is that when they decide to leave, the one thing that compels them to leave are the ideas of the Paris Commune that has just occurred. And Freemasons organized a conference in Saint-Imier to tell people what had happened in Paris. Bakounine goes to Saint-Imier. Bakounine is a Russian prince. He's not a blue-collar worker. He comes and explains a theory that's very different from Marxist theory. And Prince Bakounine has a huge influence on the fact that many people leave to create anarchist communities. Malatesta also goes to Saint-Imier. He's very young at the time. He's named Benjamin, and that's the way I call him in the book, but I can tell you he is Malatesta. I found his letters. So these women leave for an ideal. I don't think they consider themselves as anarchists when they leave. They just want to escape their background, and they want to leave without any men. That's very important. All these women have had very difficult stories. They've realized that their lovers, husbands, some are even widows, but they want to try out another type of life. So these 8 women leave. 2 of them have already left and never make it back. So there's this ideal, and the story is told from the point of view of the one who's the less convinced, which is very important from my point of view because there's a distance between her beliefs and what she tells. The society at the time looks upon these women very negatively. And Constance, you told us about Théroigne de Méricourt, and it's the case with many women. They're humiliated because of their activism. Yes, absolutely, and that's why I chose her to open the book. I wanted to start with the French Revolution. I guess it's a patriotic reflex. I could have chosen Olympe de Gouges, who ended up being beheaded because of her ideas. But with Théroigne de Méricourt, there was this disconnect, this dichotomy. It was important for me to show that she was an activist. She wanted women to be able to be heard. She wanted them to have the right to become politically active based on ideas of rationalism, and she wanted them to have the right to take up arms. This is something that we tend to neglect, but it was very foundational during the French Revolution. Women had the right to fight. They have the right to fight and defend the country. And Théroigne de Méricourt is stigmatized. She is attacked very violently right from the start. She's accused of being a prostitute, of transmitting venereal diseases. Her name is changed to make her into a bourgeois woman. She was very much traumatized, and her death is very tragic, with very humiliating effects. She'll end up in the Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital, where she'll be used as a guinea pig. There's a biography, Miguel d'Unesco, on this particular subject. I wanted to show the variety of causes these women defended, while giving this notion that women's activism, feminist activism, has a gender aspect that is often very negative and very violent.
You share one woman, Louise Michel. You share your interest for her. You can tell us about this in the context in which she enters your books. She's mentioned several times. I will read the quote on the family later. How do you see Louise Michel today? And how do you see her, the way she's remembered? She appears in my book because she was deported on a big ship called the Virginia, and the revolutionaries of the Paris Commune were kept in cages. They were deported to New Caledonia and other islands. So she's on this ship, and a captain writes an account of her behavior. She's very rebellious, but also a lot of solidarity. So my 10 Little Anarchists, there are only 8 of them at the time, I imagine that they're on the ship with Louise Michel and that they understand what she's going through. So it's another step towards the theorization of anarchism. But I don't think there's a theory of anarchy. I think it's just a set of practices. So Louise Michel plays a very patent role in this community. Do you want to tell us about Louise Michel? No, I want to say something else. If I may give a spoiler about Daniel's book. I'm sorry if I'm repeating this for the 4th time, but I really like the fact that in his book, his narrator doesn't like Louise Michel because she thinks she's a bit ugly. He thinks she's a bit ugly. So I think the way you depict Louise Michel is very correct and very tender, very gentle. And I think it was important to break this myth. Louise Michel is a mythical figure, and rightly so. She was an extraordinary woman. She appears in both my books because she spent a long time in London in exile. Not a lot of people know that. She was living in London when she died. She was an Anglophile. But there is no chapter about her in my book, but I do talk about Pierre Klemp. And one of the ships on which Pierre Klemp works is called Louise Michel. And it is funded by the artist Banksy. So they chose the name Louise Michel for the ship to pay tribute to this long tradition of female solidarity and solidarity with refugees. And all of Louise Michel's values. So the ship, this is interesting because it was on a ship that she became an anarchist when she was being taken to New Caledonia. And here she appears again in the 21st century, having a ship named after her. There's some synchronicity there that's very interesting. You talk about the family, Daniel Roulet, which is interesting, and the family is a place where anarchy is invented or reinvented. Louise Michel is talking. If I had to get rid of cholera or mosquitoes, government or hail, the fatherland or hail, or something else, I would choose to destroy the family. Your Little Anarchists are not part of a traditional family, a nuclear family. Some of them have children. They bring them up as a group. Is that their first struggle, the struggle against the family? Yes, I think so. There's a journal of female anarchists that was written, and we see that they claim a slogan. It was even suggested as a byline to my book, which is, no God, no master, no husband. They added no husband. these anarchists. In these texts that come from Buenos Aires, they want to be in front in protest marches, not in the back. And I think it's safe to say they invented the black blocs, because they were always dressed in black. And when the movement reached the United States, it became called the black bloc. Their idea was that the family was oppressive. The patriarchy, the patriarchal structure of the family was oppressive. They were subsumed by a lot of other revolutionary members as underlings. They would be told, now you sit there, just sit there while we carry out the revolution. And they said, no, it's our revolution and we're in charge. It's everyone's revolution and we can be in charge too. So against the tradition of Marx and all the others. So this is why I say that there's no theory of anarchism. It's all about practice. These women don't really know where they're going. Child rearing is a mixed bag in this community, but what's important is to experiment. We're going to destroy the world, but we're not going to tell you what we're going to replace it with, a utopia or something else. We're going to try out a lot of ideas and see what works. This makes Proudhon say that anarchy is the true order, whereas for others it means chaos. So this fight against the family and the patriarchy is really comes from anarchist experiments. Your book talks about Emma Goldman in particular, but what do these other women think about the family? You talk about this at certain points in the book. Yes, it's true. Qiu Jin, the Chinese revolutionary, and Alexandra Kollontai leaves her husband and son to become a revolutionary. And of course, sexual freedom was at the center of Alexandra Kollontai's life. Of course, she was stigmatized for this as well. But she also did a lot of work during the 1917 revolution in favor of the family. She was in charge of the first women's ministries. She founded the crèche. She had a very modern view of women's work, especially for the proletarian classes. So a very interesting perspective there. And then, of course, Emma Goldman, who met Alexandra Kollontai during the 1917 revolution. Her perspective is closer to traditional anarchism with sexual freedom thrown in. This is not a topic which I highlighted as such, but of course it's important. The three main struggles in your book abortion, contraception, and maybe the birth control, and maybe the family? Yes, of course. There's a chapter on the 343 signatories of the manifesto. So there, it wasn't just one woman, it was 343, and in fact, many others on the sidelines. And of course, abortion goes hand in hand with this. And of course, this is very relevant today because just because abortion is a right, it doesn't mean it's a vested right. It can still be lost, as we're seeing today. In the U.S., yes. In the U.S., they're maintaining the right to abortion, and I'm thinking about other countries where medical deserts are a big problem. But I finished the book and sent it off to the printers just when Trump was being reelected. So I think I might have written it slightly differently if I had finished it later. But of course, what's going on is striking. The backsliding on abortion. When you think of all the effort that went into attaining this right and how easy it was to lose it. And in fact, they're using the same type of laws as they were using at the time of Emma Goldman to do this. Danielle, your anarchists have a long journey and end up in Buenos Aires, and their activism becomes more clearly political then. I wondered, and I know you'd like to talk about this, what kind of action should we choose? Direct action, violent action? All of Constance's women wondered about this as well. Well, from 1870 on, this was discussed in anarchist journals because of the police repression against anarchism. The first protest took place in a Swiss town, and the police had received billy clubs. Until then, the police didn't have billy clubs. They had other weapons. And the protesters had never seen police armed with billy clubs. So then we had the whole period of direct action, and over 2,000 assassination attempts were committed in Russia because the idea is we have to cut the head off of the system. We have to behead the system, and that will move us forward faster than trying to work with the government or overthrow a government. The Marxists were, of course, very much opposed to this theory. So the idea of anarchist violence it was very important. In 1909, the largest trade union in Buenos Aires was an anarchist trade union. It had over 1 million members, and the law enforcement officers and the army massacred them during a protest. They had even organized a team to come up behind to follow them and clean the blood off the streets. Then, during the Ukrainian Revolution, this idea of, and then the Spanish Republicans, the idea of violence continues with the fights between the communists and the anarchists. So it's an ongoing issue. How do we start experimenting? Not to take power. The anarchists, this is important, the anarchists don't want anyone to hold power. The aim of the struggle is to experiment with a society in which power is not delegated and remains in the hands of the people. So this is not a conventional idea. We form a party, we take over power, we organize a putsch, and etc. So this affected you personally, didn't it? Well, you were highly active, politically active, fighting for conscientious conscientious objectors, and the whole matter with Alex Springer's chalet. Well, I don't think I could be a novelist writing about anarchy unless I had some sort of personal experience. And if I didn't feel like this was part of my existence, I'm not denying in any way that in some circumstances I was violent. A few months ago, I tried to get into Bahrain, and the police sent me back because they'd seen me on the internet and they saw the blurb that's on all my books. So this is one of the questions that I'm interested in. I haven't found the answer yet, but I don't think that there is a direct response that it should be given in all, that is the same in all circumstances, and I don't think you can discard the idea of violence outright. It just depends on the situation. We can't say we're nonviolent. Pacifists are against war, against outright war, and they've come up with all sorts of solutions, even hand-to-hand combat. Saying the Chinese against the Russians, fine. Or the Chinese against the United States, fine. So each country can send a team out and they can try to kill each other off, and we'll see who comes out alive. That's ridiculous, of course. But it also shows that there are other open spaces in this theory, and anarchy today is not just libertarianism, Trump-style libertarian who says he's against a big state, but he's keeping all of the repressive and oppressive parts of the government and getting rid of the rest. The anarchists are doing the opposite. They want to keep solidarity, the general interest, and the state apparatus is much less interesting to them. You were saying, Constance, that the fight for women's vote is not an anarchist struggle. Yes, I think that it started with the Workers' International in London, when there was a schism between the Marxists and the anarchists, and that was the subject. Marxists wanted to get into the bourgeois parliament, and little by little change it from the inside, and the anarchists said, no, we need a putsch with the army. Look what happened in 1917. It was a disaster. The anarchists said, we don't want to delegate our power, give it up to people who will have a majority and will no longer have a say. But it's not a complete political theory. It doesn't cover everything. Constance, this idea of moving from words to action is interesting from the standpoint of Jamila Bouhired, Mujahida during the Algerian War. Would you like to tell us a bit about this? Yes, of course. I've done a lot of work on anarchism, and I think it's impossible to talk about revolution without talking about violence. Before we even ask if violent action is necessary, all you have to do is look at revolutionary history. There are always episodes of violence. So Jamila Bouhired, what she would do is she would place bombs in different places at the beginning of the colonial war, the War of Independence in Algeria. It was an incredibly violent war. I think we have to realize that, recognize it. It's also, her action was also part of a cycle of violence, because when she was finally arrested and tortured, what she went through gave rise to a huge debate about torture. It was an important time of growing awareness about torture through what she had gone through. Okay, so let's not start a discussion about terrorism, but I think the English suffragettes used violence to gain the vote for women, but it wasn't in with a perspective of taking power. In fact, it was quite individualistic. They committed strategic acts of violence, some arson, some attacks on politicians, but there was a huge amount of violence, symbolic violence against themselves. Don't forget that against them, those who were arrested were force-fed when they went on hunger strikes. That was incredibly violent. And the suffragette who I chose to tell this story, Davison, Emily Davison, ended up being killed by the king's horse when she stepped out onto the racetrack during the King's Derby. So it's complex, symbolic violence, actual violence, physical violence, all of that to get attention, achieve their aims. It's a complex question, violence, but it's indispensable sometimes.
In a very compelling chapter of the 10 Little Anarchists, Mathilde dies. You're referring to what happens in Buenos Aires on May 1st. The anarchists start saying that violence is structural, it's inside the system. There were these watchmaking women who had to work. They didn't have the right to whistle while they were doing their work. For them, it was something that they couldn't stand, and that's where they started. They said the way we're dealt with is something that we can't stand. It's unbearable. So that's the starting point. And then they start taking part in protest marches. They wanted to be front and center, despite the fact that they know that they might be shot. I tried to document what I say as much as possible. And just about the documents that I used to write this novel, I was often asked, well, what's true and what did you invent? Well, it's really simple for historians. At the beginning, there's the explanation. These anarchists had kept a diary, a journal. They wrote down all sorts of things, and they didn't know exactly where it came from. And that's exactly what happened to me. At first, when I started the novel, I went to Punta Arenas in Patagonia, and I went to an outdoor museum, saw the Panaderia Universal, cooperative bakery that women in the area had opened to bake bread. On this base, I went to different museums. I went to all the places I described, and each and every time I took notes. I copied what I could find in letters and in public records. But I felt that as a novelist, I'm not a historian. That has to be very clear. I'm not a historian. There are many things that you'll see that you'll find very unlikely. I'll try and convince you of the contrary. But what was important to me was to tell the story from the point of view of these women so that the readers may understand our history much better, where we're coming from much better. We're coming from poor country that was Switzerland at the time. There was emigration, there was violence, villages that cost too much would be emptied. When someone was on social benefits and it cost too much for society, that person was asked whether they wanted to emigrate, and if yes, they couldn't return. If they returned, they wouldn't no longer have social benefits, and they would be stripped from their passports. So to me, it was very important to find all this information in the Saint-Imier archives and letters. Anarchists themselves did not send many letters at all. For those who died, they sent a first letter saying, "We arrived," a second letter where parents are informed that they disappeared or they died. And then third letter, the official death act. Contrary to you, Constance, I'm not interested in looking at law enforcement records to know what happened to them. I'm interested in another point of view. Now, I know historians have to go look at these public records to know what they've been accused of. And now you have the floor. Well, in 1880, a book on anarchists in exile in London tries to explain exactly this. So you have to understand that anarchists went all over the world. They traveled all over the world. There were different language diasporas everywhere in the world. It was really a global movement. But there are many of us historians working on these issues. And Daniel's novel brings a completely different point of view that comes and adds on to the stories on which I work on the basis of public records. You give a voice to the stakeholders, actors, actresses, law enforcement neglected women because they had no clue women could be activists. It was great for them because they could do all sorts of things. They could smuggle anarchist journals and that kind of thing. So your novel is absolutely marvelous. It's fascinating, and I think it's very useful from a historical point of view. And I can say the exact contrary. Constance's book is extremely useful. Well, we're extremely happy that we were able to make you meet. Now, Constance, there's something you say in your introduction. You say that these women, some are well-known. It's the case of Angela Davis, Harriet Tubman. Others are not quite as known. Whether they're known or not, whether they've been erased from history or mystified, what's important is that they may be remembered fairly. In contemporary American society, there are figures that people thought were consecrated in Harriet Tubman, Stormé de Larverie, of the Stonewall Uprising. And these past few months, with the new Trump administration, we realized that these figures are being questioned again. But you've mentioned the example of Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman was a part of the Underground Railroad. We all know about through Colson Whitehead's novel. It's a transportation, or rather underground network that made it possible for slaves in the South to escape and be freed. Harriet Tubman is a pioneer. We don't know how many slaves she was able to free, but there are probably hundreds of them. And Harriet Tubman in the US and also in the UK, where I live, she's a superstar. She's extremely famous, and she built her own legend. She's one of these activists who praised herself. It may have made other struggles more invisible. It may have biased the way we remember her. So I wrote this chapter thinking, well, it might be a little too academic, but it's good to have it. And then Trump comes to power again, and he's already erased Harriet Tubman's name from a memorial celebrating the history of the Underground Railroad and the struggle against slavery. So it's a very striking example of backsliding, whereas her story had been established. Stormé de Larverie is not quite as well known as Harriet Tubman. She's a woman who defined herself as a lesbian and played with her gender. The story of the Stonewall Uprising is not just the story of gay rights or homosexual rights, but it helped me take up the story of groups that have been made invisible in the context of the struggle for the rights of the LGBTQIA+. On the Stonewall Memorial, one of the first measures taken by the Trump administration was to take out the T from LGBTQ+. Which is also an illustration of backsliding. We thought that this history had been established, but it goes to show that history is constantly in flux. One last question before we turn to the audience for questions. Do you have a preference for between your anarchists? Well, very briefly, I talked about Pia Klemp. She's extremely brave, and her fight is very relevant in this day and age. But I'd say Angela Davis, maybe. Her career is absolutely incredible. She's more than 80 years old. She was involved in the civil rights movement, and she's still an activist to this day. I've written about her ideas, especially the Hillary Clinton candidacy against Trump. She's very critical of this candidacy. And this could apply to the most recent presidential election. Her idea is that women's empowerment is not necessarily what's appealing to people at this stage, and that the Democratic Party has a responsibility, if it's the only thing it has to offer to its electors. Well, I've got 10 characters who are partly invented, and it's hard to find the one that I like the most. I tried to make Mathilde likable to my readership. Mathilde has a sort of a secret story to it. We know that she's had a child with Malatesta, but she doesn't share it with anyone. She doesn't even share it with her friends. And I think the right to privacy, the right not to have to disclose certain aspects of her life is very important. It's important for me too, so it's a character that I like quite a lot. Now, her death is tragic. She will be murdered on Falcone's orders, and to me, the novel is important, tragically important. I accuse Falcone of a lot of things that happened. He's a horrible character. He's the chief of the Buenos Aires police. He's responsible for all the massacres that occur. When he's murdered, the local bourgeoisie, the establishment, build an incredible grave in the Buenos Aires cemetery. And following the publishing of my novel, there was an attack against this grave. Now, it's a very symbolic act, and the woman who was responsible for this attack lost her arm, by the way, which goes to show that literature can be dangerous. Turning to the audience, do you have questions either for Daniel de Roulet or Constance Bantman? With a microphone so the interpreters can hear. I have a very pragmatic question for you. Has your book been translated? And if so, in what language? Is this to me? Well, if so, then my novel was translated in English. You can find it upstairs. It was translated in New York. It was translated in Greece. It also was published in German before it even was published in French, published by Limat. And then it was published first by Buchet-Chastel and then by Libretto in French.
Madame au premier.
Why little in the title? They're little anarchists. Why couldn't they be great anarchists? You're absolutely right. And in actual fact, the German title is 10 unbekümmerte Anarchists. So 10 careless anarchists, or carefree anarchists. In English, you don't really realize they're women at all. Now, the title comes from the Agatha Christie novel, And Then There Were None, 10 Little Niggers originally. The song is a song about emigration. It's a song that was sung in the 1850s. The 10 characters in the song die one after the others. It was the case in boats involved in the slave trade, and that's the exact structure of the novel. Chapter after chapter, the characters die, one after the other. But it was also an insult. When they left their village, they were probably told, well, you're only 10 little anarchists anyway. I find in French the title can be slightly ironic. It's not quite as ironic in English, and then in German, absolutely not. In Greek, they did keep the original title, 10 Little Women Anarchists. Are there no other questions? I think there's one right there.
I have a very small question for both Daniel and Constance. I guess political lifestyle of anarchists had some effect on their personal life, and I wanted you to tell a little bit about that.
Well, anarchists, and I think that's interesting, don't draw a distinction between professional life, political ideas, and action, and their type of activism. If they say that they for sexual freedom, they don't marry. If they're, I don't know, in favor of violence and child rearing, I say this off the top of my head, they will walk the talk. What's personal is political, what's political is personal. The novelist can't take this on by telling the life on the one hand and talking about political aspects on the other hand. One illustrates the other.
Tout à fait d'accord.
I totally agree. There's the life as an anarchist, and there are very few political movements who've thought of the way the political and the personal are intertwined. There's an existential aspect to it, and that's exactly in the title of the chapter on Emma Goldman. Choosing to live as an anarchist means taking political risks. There are meetings. You need to make choices, and these choices are associated to a certain degree of danger. So that's also existential. There's one thing I can add. There's something that we haven't talked about in relation to anarchism that makes it a totally different movement from other political movements. It's the relationship to the environment, to nature. For Marxists, nature is seen as a productive force. Same thing with capitalism, which is the reason why we're in the situation we're in. Whereas for anarchists, as early as the 18th century, they question their relationship to nature. If they build a community like the one I describe, with a cooperative bakery, for instance, but very often they build farmers' co-ops. Sometimes it's very complicated, but one is a teacher, the other one is a mason. They decide to become farmers or gardeners, and it's hard to grow vegetables from one day to the next, but that's part and parcel of their political theory. How are we going to be able to sustain ourselves? How are we going to be able to feed ourselves? And this is something that is practiced in France by so-called zadistes. They don't always say it in so many words, but they take up anarchist idea. We don't give a power. Women have as many rights as the others, and what's also important is to let nature be and use it reasonably. Well, if there are no more questions, thank you very much, and we'll be seeing you upstairs for the signing of your books.